We are back, and you're listening to the Critical Hour on Radio Sputnik. I'm Wilmer Leon, joined here by my co-host, Garland Nixon.
Thank you, Wilmer.
Iran announces locally made ballistic missile and cruise missiles amid U.S. tensions. Iran has displayed a surface-to-surface ballistic missile today that Defense Minister Amir Hatami said had a range of 1,400 kilometers and a new cruise missile, ignoring U.S. demands that Tehran halt its missile program. This while Vaezi says tankers seized by U.S. do not belong to Iran. Presidential Chief of Staff Mahmoud Vaezi said on yesterday that the tankers seized by the U.S. and the cargo they were carrying did not belong to Iran. For insight into this, we turn to our next guest. He's a frequent collaborator with all major news outlets and author of City Builders and Vandals in Our Age, Caleb Maupin. As always, Caleb, welcome back.
Sure. Glad to be here as always.
So in the midst of snapback sanctions and the U.S. losing the arms vote in the UN on Saturday, now Iran is displaying a surface-to-surface missile and a cruise missile. What does this say to you, Caleb Maupin?
Well, keep in mind that the snapback mechanism in the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, was imposed as kind of the final part of the agreement. And the idea was that if Iran were to break the agreement regarding its peaceful nuclear energy program, if Iran were to break that agreement, then the sanctions would snap back and be immediately reimposed. However, what is bizarre about this situation is that Iran has not broken the nuclear agreement. It's Donald Trump who has broken the nuclear agreement. The White House has ripped up the Iran deal. So in response to that, we're now going to impose this snapback mechanism and attempt to reimpose the sanctions when it's pretty clear that Iran did everything it was supposed to do. The United States broke the agreement, not Iran. So how exactly does that translate to Iran having sanctions reimposed on it? I mean, the logic just doesn't follow. So, of course, in response to that, Iran is building up its missile program and increasing its capabilities for self-defense. If you look at, Cold War terminology, you talk about strike enabling, that, when your opponent develops a weapon that would prevent you from retaliating if they struck you, then you obviously have to do something about it and develop your own mechanism, because you never want to have your opponent, in a situation where they are enabled. They have a strike-enabling missile where they'd be able to attack you, and you wouldn't be able to retaliate. And so that's kind of the situation. And Iran, faces off with Israel. Israel has nuclear weapons. Israel has the capability to attack Iran very effectively with cruise missiles. Iran has developed its own cruise missile system so that if Israel were to attack them, they could immediately retaliate. And so Israel proceeds to try and develop a strike-enabling mechanism so they could block any Iranian retaliation. This is how the game of arms races and escalations is played. And Iran at this point is sensing that the United States is looking to escalate with them and try to impose these snapback sanctions. So, of course, Iran is going to increase its weapons proliferation.
Well, I think a couple of things that I'll put together here, and that is the arrest of the Huawei executive in Canada, the Julian Assange arrest, which are both, attempts at exercising extrajudicial power by extraterritorial law enforcement power by the U.S., saying our laws cover the globe. But additionally, to me, this is the same thing, because what they're saying is, okay, we will drop out of this agreement. Oh, you know what? It benefits us to be in the agreement, so we're going to claim that we're in the agreement. Basically saying, when it comes to the United States, whatever rules, whatever systems, whatever rule of law we have, the U.S. is like a god, not just a global hegemon, not just the most powerful. We're above all of these rules. We can insert ourselves into an agreement when we choose. We can take ourselves out of agreement when we choose. We can tell our friends what to do, our adversaries. We are the one and only ruler. We're the hyperpower, and everyone has to do what we say doing. I mean, and that's what it is. And it's the reality, I think, is we're doing that. And the rest of the world is just looking at us saying, you guys are nuts. It just doesn't work that way anymore. And we're running headlong into reality. What do you think, Caleb?
Well, I think that Donald Trump has positioned himself as an ally of some particular factions that want to escalate with Iran. I mean, you've got the old regime, of Iran, the Pahlavi royal family in Southern California. There are a lot of very, very wealthy Iranians who fled the country in 1979, who live in Southern California and very much love Donald Trump and think that the Democrats are soft on Iran and oppose the Iran nuclear deal. You've got Likud in Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, Shelton Adelson, the wealthy Nevada real estate owner who is very much a supporter of Netanyahu, who's also a big supporter of Donald Trump. You've got, weapons manufacturers that really would benefit from an escalation of regional tension. Betsy DeVos, Trump's Secretary of Education, is a billionaire. Her brother is Eric Prince of Blackwater Academy. So, the Trump White House has positioned itself into an alliance with people who benefit not from negotiation with Iran, not from the United States opening up investment in Iran, not from a nuclear deal that would potentially bring the United States and Iran closer to each other, but rather from escalating tension. There's a lot more money to be made selling weapons. There's a lot more political benefit for the Likud party in Israel, for the notion of an Iranian threat. There's a lot more, of kind of a personal vendetta and such from the Pahlavi folks in Southern California and the Iranian exile community. All of this kind of translates to Donald Trump positioning himself in a way in which the worst thing that could possibly happen for him and his allies is for the United States and Iran to start getting along, as it briefly looked like we might possibly be moving in that direction during the late years of the Obama administration after the nuclear deal was signed. So I think that that's what's going on here is that, Pompeo, Donald Trump have decided that there will be tension with Iran. There must be tension with Iran at all costs. And no matter what they can do to escalate the situation with the United States and Iran, they are going to do for their own political and economic benefit.
As we look at the growing relationship between Iran and China, and in some of the agreements that they've struck are military exchanges, purchases of equipment and technology. But what strikes me interesting about this story is that these missiles that Iran is now demonstrating were domestically made. And the surface-to-surface missile has a range of 1,400 kilometers, which I think is about 870 miles. That's nothing to be poo-pooed or sneezed at, along with a new cruise missile. During all this, Israel beats its chest and says, we're the superpower in the region and we can squash you like a bug. I'm wondering how does this change the dynamic of the narrative, whether they want to admit it or not?
Well, I think that this is a continuation of Iran's necessity of defending itself. That if Iran were to be attacked by Israel, it would have the ability to unleash a torrent of cruise missiles onto Israel in retaliation. And that's kind of what prevents Iran from being attacked. The folks in Tel Aviv have wanted regime change in Tehran for many decades, but Iran prevents that by having a huge cache of missiles. And that seems to be pretty much the situation. And there's been a recent escalation. And every time they test a missile, Israel makes it sound like this is somehow a threat against them, as if their own nuclear proliferation, which has been revealed to the world, the worst kept secret in history, is not a threat to the entire region. Israel is not part of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. The revelation of its nuclear program is something that's widely understood, even though the United States and Israel will not acknowledge that this nuclear program exists. And Israel is threatening the whole region, in particular regional, rivals and countries in the region that are very long-standingly opposed to them, like Iran. Because of that, Iran is going to be committed to building up its arsenal of defense, and we shouldn't be surprised when they do this.
The other thing I think is the U.S. has argued that we want a new deal, and in that deal, we want Iran to basically give up or minimize its ballistic missile, defense program. And I think they're not stupid. They looked at what happened in Iraq. They looked at what happened with Libya and Syria, and no one in their right mind is going to give up their defensive their defensive strength. That being said, I think the U.S. and Israel has to know that. For God's sake, if I can figure it out, I'm pretty sure they can, which means that this siege against Iran, similar to the one against Venezuela, really is just a punishing siege. Really, it's just meant to destabilize the country and to terrorize the country, when the fact of the matter is they know that Iran won't and can't give in to the extreme requests they're making in order for them to back off the siege. What do you think, Caleb?
Well, I think that also one of the demands of this proposed new deal that the Trump and Pompeo forces say they would hope that Iran would sign is they say they want Iran to end the, quote, proxy wars in the region. Well, look into the details of what they're talking about, and that makes the United States look particularly bad. One of the proxy wars that they refer to is the people of Bahrain, the overwhelming majority of which are Shia Muslims, demanding the right to vote and the right to have an elected government, and get rid of the autocratic king imposed on them by the Saudi regime. So this is a proxy war. I mean, the allegation is that Iran is somehow funding protests and dissident movements, calling for elected government among the people of Bahrain. The fact that the United States is demanding they stop doing that, while Saudi Arabia is continuing to prop up an autocratic regime in Bahrain, doesn't look particularly good. I mean, Yemen, for example, the allegation is that somehow Iran is supporting the people of Yemen, who are fighting for their independence and fighting to, not have Saudi domination over their country. They want to utilize the oil resources to raise themselves up out of poverty. All over Iraq, there are Shia who are being attacked by Wahhabi extremists, forces tied to Saudi Arabia that consider Shia Muslims to be apostates, want to kill them all. So Iran is, giving support to the Shia community and allowing it to defend itself in Iraq. Throughout the region, it is alleged that Iran is tied to various groups. And if you look at those groups, a lot of those groups are doing things that really kind of show that it's the allies of the United States that are acting undemocratic, that are violating human rights. And Iran is enabling a lot of people throughout the region to defend themselves, according to the allegations. Now, we don't know to what extent this is really true or not, by the way. The United States would have you believe that the people of Yemen, that are fighting for their independence are all Iranian puppets. They would have you believe that, the people of Bahrain don't really want freedom. This is all just a conspiracy from Iran. How much is Iran actually involved in these regional conflicts? We don't really know. But regardless, if you look at the details of those regional conflicts, it doesn't look particularly good for the United States and Saudi Arabia.
Real quick, we have just about a minute and a half left. Last week, the U.S. said, we seized 4 Iranian tankers and we have captured them and brought them to port in Texas. And Iran saying, no, those aren't our tankers and that's not our oil. Those tankers were part of a flotilla of maybe 9. 4 of them split off and went their own way, and you got those, you didn't get ours. Your thoughts quickly on that whole back and forth.
Well, as we've discussed previously, the way sanctions work, it seems like some oil was provided to someone else. A third party purchased this oil and then purchased some tankers, and this isn't directly Iranian property at this point. But I think that the allegation of the United States is that this is somebody who did business with somebody who did business with somebody who did business with Iran. I think that's the allegation of the United States, and that may be true.
But at the end of the day, don't beat your chest so much, because it's not quite as you're proclaiming it to be.
Indeed.
Caleb Maupin, as always, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate your analysis. We look forward to having you back.
Sure thing. Always a pleasure.
Folks, you've been listening to the Critical Hour here on Radio Sputnik. Thank you for allowing our voices into your space. On behalf of myself and my co-host, Garland Nixon, we hope you were informed and enlightened. We look forward to talking with you all right here tomorrow on Radio Sputnik. Be safe, practice physical distancing, wear your masks, wash your hands, stay home, and listen to the Critical Hour. Peace and blessings. We're out.